Hello. Okay. Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here. My name is Lizzy Zarate, and as of 2 weeks ago, I am the archivist for the New York City Independent Budget Office. But before that, I was an MA student in Archives and Public History at New York University. So today I'm just going to talk about my capstone project, which was about creating a web archive primary source analysis activity for a class of undergraduate students. In this presentation, I'm going to walk through the assignment, discuss some of my findings, and propose ways for this kind of work to be replicated at other institutions with web collections. So first, a little bit about the context and the origin of this project. So NYU is a large private research university, and accordingly, NYU Libraries is gigantic. One of these departments is Archival Collections Management, or ACM, and their function is just to support special collections in basic archival processes like accessioning, arrangement, description, things like that. In ACM, there's one full-time web archivist who handles all of the web collections for the entire university. Her name is Nicole Greenhouse. In 2021, she hired me as the part-time web archive student assistant, and I stayed in that from undergrad through my master's program. So I was there for 3 years. And while I was in this role, I observed a few things. So first, there was a need to integrate web archives into existing archival outreach. Sometimes it can be kind of hard to conceptualize how born digital materials would be used in the same way that traditional physical materials are used. So that was one thing that I saw. The other thing was for web archive outreach, encouraging use in addition to curation and creation. So there have been a number of projects over the years, most of them spearheaded by the Internet Archive, that focus on promoting web archives, but a lot of that focuses on curation and creation. But with NYU, over the past decade, they've collected about 20 terabytes of web content, spanning over 6,000 seeds that are, some of them are crawled one time, some of them are crawled weekly. So we don't have to worry about creation. What we do have to worry about is, now that we have all of this collected, how are we going to use that? Because the web is a collection of data that can be harvested and scraped, a lot of times when we think about using web archives or activating them, we think about research that takes place on a mass scale with a lot of websites. So the question that I really wanted to investigate with this project was, if we think of one singular crawl of a website as a discrete historical document, what kind of value can we derive from that? So with all that in mind, I had a few goals for the assignment. First, as we all know, engaging students in university archives and outreach can be kind of difficult. So I wanted to see if using websites, a format that they are familiar with, if that could be a way of engaging them. My other goal was improving digital literacy as well as primary source literacy. I'm not going to talk about AI. We've heard all of it already. But because so many students are now using ChatGPT and other sources to compile and discover resources, many of which don't exist, it's important to teach students how to scrutinize sources. And of course, that has always been a focus in primary source literacy. So the two kind of go hand in hand. And the third goal was advocating for more awareness, funding, and resources to sustain web archiving programs. Like I said, there's one full-time web archivist at NYU, and even that is major. There are a lot of university archives and libraries where web archiving is just one function of a regular librarian or archivist's responsibilities. So a lot of these places are under-resourced. And also, as we talked about yesterday, the Internet Archive has been experiencing cyber attacks and lawsuits. So as you know, it's a very fragile ecosystem that we're dealing with. So the more people that we can get to care about web archives, the better. Okay, so on to the setup of the assignment. I fell into the Google Docs trap. I should have talked to Paul beforehand, but it was just a Google Doc template with the questions and the instructions for the assignment, and I distributed that via the Brightspace course page. Students made a copy, they wrote in their responses and submitted it back to me via email. The class met twice a week. So on the Monday session, Lindsay Miller of Vinegar Syndrome came and spoke to the class about their work with web archives. And then on the Wednesday session, I led the activity. Also, the assignment was delivered to a class of 17 undergrads in the spring 2024 semester. Dr. Ren Pepitone of the history department taught a class on the history of pornography. And this was open enrollment, so the respondents ended up coming from all different schools, all different majors, anywhere from engineering to international relations to film. So the actual assignment was 40 minutes to fill out the activity, just sort of poke around the collections, write out their responses. And then the next 35 minutes was just to get a class discussion and a Q&A. And also while they were filling out the activity, they were encouraged to collaborate with each other and also ask me any questions. And Dr. Pepitone also filled out the assignment at the same time. So it was also a nice learning experience for faculty as well. There were 3 sections to the assignment, so I'll go through those now. The first was discovery and access. I asked students to browse through NYU's organizational profile on Archive.it and just sort of look around, see what interested them. This is a screenshot of one random website from the labor union's collection. Most of the students had used the Wayback Machine before, but for one, they didn't really know how it worked. And two, the way that you use the Wayback Machine, generally you have a URL already in mind. So they weren't used to exploring a thematic collection and discovering archive websites that way. So that was new to them. The second section was conceptualization. So with this, I was trying to evaluate how students understood archive websites and sort of the nuances of that compared to a live web page. Like I said, the class was history of pornography. I didn't really want the students searching for pornography in the web collections, so I provided them with a list of websites that I knew had information relevant to the course content. It was about 10 different links, and this included different types of websites from student-run news to community organizations to personal websites. All of these included firsthand accounts of people talking about their experiences with subjects related to pornography. I also encouraged them to look through the calendar page on Archive.it and compare different crawls of the same website over time. And what I was really trying to emphasize to the students was that websites, unlike a lot of other historical documents, change their content over time, and that content tends to change pretty rapidly. And that has pretty major consequences for accountability and transparency. And so there's this complicating element of not necessarily having to teach today's students how to understand an archive website on the content level, but you do have to teach them how it works on the theoretical level. And encouraging students to think about the web in this way also encourages just all of us as researchers to assess the intrinsic value of a website as a dynamic piece of historical content and evidence. And these are more questions from that section, basically just questions asking them to consider the nature of the source, how it changes over time, encouraging students to click on the links, play the videos, just generally experience the website. And the final section was interpretation and analysis. I asked students to connect the page that they picked to other readings and course materials, scrutinizing the source by asking what questions the website doesn't answer, and also formulating a research question that they could possibly use the website that they picked to answer. All tasks that are generally part of regular primary source analysis. I just wanted to see if we could achieve similar results using a website. And then there was also reflection. I just wanted to get a sense of how students were feeling about this activity since it was my first time doing it. Okay, so this activity resulted in several findings. These are some quotes from the students. The first major finding was that the assignment received very positive feedback from students, which was a pleasant surprise. I was very concerned because it was an ungraded writing assignment that I was giving to them at 9:30 in the morning. But they were very engaged, and especially during the class discussion, they had a lot of questions for me. They expressed that they had an interest in using this resource again in the future, whether that be for academic research or just their own personal interest. A lot of them expressed that they didn't know that this was a resource offered by NYU libraries, despite having attended NYU libraries outreach events in the past. And another finding was that students gravitate towards websites that capture really well. They like websites that are easy to use. In my list of websites, I intentionally picked a few crawls where there were issues. So for instance, images or videos not capturing properly. Students didn't like these. They said that they just skipped over them. They don't view technical issues in capturing websites the same way that they would deterioration in, for example, paper materials. If they find it hard to use, they won't use it. Another finding, despite the positive feedback to this activity, students did have mixed opinions on their preference between analog versus digital primary sources. Some were of the opinion that born digital sources were easier to search and access, but as you can see from the second quote, some felt that archive websites almost provided them with too much information for them to parse. And both of these perspectives make compelling points about archival accessibility. It just suggests that students really prioritize usability when it comes to the sources they use. And finally, students expressed that they felt more of a personal connection with these sources than ones that they've used before on paper. Students really liked seeing personal narratives reflected on websites because they were familiar with formats like blog posts, social media. One of the links in the list was a MySpace profile, so they really liked that. They expressed that they felt more comfortable interpreting and analyzing these as sources because they just felt more of a personal connection, and it helps them also place other older historical documents in context and view them with that same connection. To be clear, there is still a limitation on how much web archives can be utilized in history research because your research interest would have to be the late 1990s at the very earliest. But if our goal is to engage a wider user base and get students interested in the resources that the library has to offer, I think that this could serve as a good starting point for that. And finally, I want to wrap up with a few recommendations for anyone who might be interested in doing a similar project. So just logistics, allowing more class time for discussion. We're a little bit limited by that, but students seem to feel more comfortable just expressing their opinions through a discussion rather than the writing. Using a different format for delivering the assignment. I used a Google Doc because I thought that might feel a little bit less like a test or like a quiz that they had to submit. But in terms of comparing the results, I'm never doing that again. Use Qualtrics, use Google Forms, do something like that. The other recommendation, thinking about ways to partner with other departments to increase student and user engagement. So like I said, students had attended library events before where they talked about the resources offered, but they didn't know about this. And ACM is not a public-facing department within the library, so this could be one potential way for archivists in that department to connect with students and also with faculty and sort of just bolster that connection. And finally, like I said before, a wide variety of majors and identities were represented in this class of 17 students. And one of the successes was that they were all able to find something in the web collections that really spoke to them and their research interests. So in the future, I definitely see potential for this activity to be adapted to other classes like journalism or anthropology. There's a lot that's been written in the field about how libraries and reading rooms can sometimes feel intimidating, especially for marginalized groups who historically haven't really been welcomed into those spaces. And web archives serve as one possible way of sort of breaking down that barrier and surfacing those narratives. So ultimately, I see this type of activity as one way of bridging the gap between web archives and traditional archives in terms of outreach. And I'm excited to see where this goes in the future, and I'm happy to take any questions. So thank you.
Thanks very much for your talk, Liz. This has been really interesting. We'll give some time for questions. Just getting the room. Do we have any questions? We have just a sec.
Thank you for that. That was great. I'm curious to know if in the web collections there are websites that are no longer online, and like if you talked about web fragility at all in your discussion.
Yeah, definitely. So one of the websites in the list that I provided was I'm from Driftwood. It's an LGBTQ plus organization that collects narratives, and some of those narratives have since been taken down. So, for example, Dave Rubin, who's now a conservative pundit, was interviewed a very long time ago, and that has been taken off of the website. But the archive version is still up. And so using examples like that, I think really connected to students. They were really interested in sort of exploring lost media, especially pertaining to the experiences of marginalized individuals. So yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, but yeah.